Simon, I'm going to take a punt here that you probably won't be watching this show and you don't think it's a good idea.
That was a pretty good guess. Yeah, I don't think it's a good idea. I mean, you've framed the issue very clearly. Marriage is so important to society. It's so important to the couple that get married. It's important as a lifelong commitment, so that people have a hope that when they get old, they're going to still have that same person with them that they married. That they can care for one another. It's important for the children that usually, not always, but often come about through marriage. It's important for society. Successive governments have described marriage as the bedrock of society. And most people recognise that. So for Channel 4 to take marriage and to put it into virtually a game show format, yes, of course it's trivialising marriage.
Will there be any harm done in this on the basis that we've seen celebrities having their celebrity weddings, selling their photos to Hello magazine and OK magazine. We know there are people who get married. I had a really close friend, pretty intelligent, I would say darn intelligent, who got married to a man she had met 2 months earlier. They'd only spent weekends together. I thought she was utterly bonkers. As it is, to be fair, they did eventually get divorced, but they were together some 10 years. Lots of people enter into marriage perhaps without as much forethought as they should. Is it any different that they do it on telly?
Well, again, you ask exactly the right question. There is a problem, isn't there, with people not being properly prepared for marriage. There is a problem in that we've lost something of a tradition of preparing ourselves for marriage, of one generation helping the next to understand, what marriage is, both by modelling it, but also by talking about it. And if I may, speaking on behalf from the Christian Institute, I think that the churches have a role that they don't always properly fulfil. If people are coming through the doors of our churches and they're going to get married, that is an opportunity for churches to ask them if they're willing to come in and just have them explain a bit about marriage, a bit about what it's for, just give them some tips on knowing how to stick together when things get rough, as they inevitably will. There are opportunities for people to help couples get ready for marriage, to make sure that the marriage is going to work. I think there is a lot that's missing in our culture when it comes to that. But this programme isn't going to solve that. This programme is just a race for the bottom in the ratings war. And we're all told that Channel 4 aren't doing terribly well on that front.
And yet, in many, many cultures, and indeed until about, 70, 80 years ago in Britain, it was quite the norm that people would marry someone who was a relative stranger, that arranged marriages were the norm. They still are the norm in many cultures, in many countries around the world, where the parents or marriage, professional marriage arrangers basically decide who would get together, and they arrange marriages based on compatibility, similar education level, religious belief, expectations of life, and actually they have quite a high success rate. You could argue that our idea of romantic love, our idea of just finding the true love of our life and our soulmate, maybe that's the silly idea. That's the irresponsible idea, and maybe marrying people on the basis of actual sort of psychological testing and predictable outcomes is a more serious way of choosing a life partner and someone to raise your child with than this rather silly notion of who you fancy.
We can be very silly about our reasons for entering into marriage. We can be very ill-considered, and you do see relationships that turn into marriages and you just think that it's an accident waiting to happen. So I'm saying, yes, I think there's a lot more we need to do to help one another to think about what marriage is before we enter into it. And you talk about arranged marriages. Yes, it does seem to work in different parts of the world. I don't know that there'd be very strong appetite for reintroducing arranged marriages over here, but I certainly think that families ought to get to know one another, ought to be helping children, young people considering marriage to make sure that they are compatible. There is this sort of hands-off approach, isn't there? A couple meet, the parents on both sides may think, we're really not sure if this marriage is going to work, but they feel crippled, they feel they can't say anything, they feel that if they do say anything they'll be portrayed as a sort of an evil parent. I think there is a role for parents and others to help people to make the right judgment about the people that they want to marry. But this program is not about arranged marriages. This is not a societal decision, a family decision with everybody involved, a careful private consideration of all the issues. This is sensation. This is trivializing marriage for the sake of a TV program. It's reality TV, which, as we all know, usually has precious little to do with reality.
Well, indeed. I suppose you'd have to ask about. I say, I can imagine a TV producer saying, "Hey, I've got a great idea." And in fact, this is stolen from a format that was used in Denmark, which did actually see people getting married, two strangers getting married. But it's. I can understand a producer coming up with this in a meeting. I can even understand it getting through all the committees and getting to the bosses and actually people doing it. I suppose what I can't understand is that people would actually agree to do it. It's the six people, the three men and the three women, who would actually agree to do it. That would bother me, because if it was a member of my family or a close friend, I would be sort of on my knees grabbing hold of them and stopping them doing it.
Well, I agree, and you have to feel sorry for the people. You have to feel sorry that they are being taken advantage of by the producers of this program. I think they're taking advantage of their gullibility or the desire for fame or something. And yes, you can only hope that people would grab these people by the heels and say, "Don't do it." But it's a sad reflection, I think, on the trivialisation of marriage generally in our culture. I think you mentioned celebrity weddings. I think that some of those have done a great deal of harm. When we've watched people cycle through one marriage after another, and we get the feeling that some of these marriages are for the sake of careers and for the sake of the cameras.
Do you want to name some names,
no.
then, Simon?
No, I don't. But we all have people in mind, and I think that's done a great deal of damage to our perception of marriage. I think that it's time for us to take stock, to remind ourselves what a wonderful, beautiful thing marriage is. To look at the great examples, to look at those people whose marriages last for decades, to look at those examples of the elderly couples who are still together, having stuck together through thick and thin. I think it's time to honour those people. I think it's time for churches and other places of worship to take their responsibilities seriously, to help people understand what marriage is. And I think that we need to be elevating the status of marriage, not trivialising. And I think that's what Channel 4 is doing here.
Simon Calvert, thank you so much for your thoughts. He's from the Christian Institute. As I think quite cunningly guessed, he wasn't a big fan